What is there to say about Legend of Zelda? When this game came out in 1986, it really did revolutionize the industry. The first big thing that it brought to us was the ability to save games on a cartridge. A small battery inside here saved your progress whenever you wanted to. Up until that point, games like Super Mario, it didn't matter how far you got. You had to start all over when the game turned off. Not with Zelda. Saved your progress, how many rupees you had, how many hearts, how many items. It was all there whenever you came back the next day. Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Legend of Zelda and other titles such as Super Mario, said he was really influenced by his childhood in Japan. Around his house were a lot of secluded forests and hidden caves that he would explore as a child. There's one famous instance that he's recalled where there was a new cave he hadn't explored yet, and he was really interested but he was scared to go in. So he went back to his house and he got a lantern. And then he went inside the cave and explored the darkest depths of that cave. And he said that experience and those moments and those memories really influenced him when he was creating The Legend of Zelda. He said he wanted to create an almost interactive garden for the player to run around in. An open world, if you will. And that's laid down the groundwork for Legend of Zelda. The next big thing was the title, Legend of Zelda. Zelda was the name of F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife. And Shigeru Miyamoto thought Zelda had a very soothing, calm sound to it when it was spoken, and he decided to name the princess after that. So, we got the groundwork for the open world, and we got our princess. With those two things combined, Legend of Zelda was born.
It feels really weird explaining exactly what Zelda is. It would be almost akin to explaining what a Mario game is, but I shall do my best. The origins of The Legend of Zelda is told in the game's instruction manual. A large war is happening in the world of Hyrule, and the leader of the attacking army is the Prince of Darkness, Ganon. Ganon invaded the kingdom to obtain the Triforce of Power, which imbued him with untold strength. Knowing that he could not gather the other part, Princess Zelda broke apart the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces to keep them from falling into Ganon's hands. She sent her maid, Impa, to escape the castle and find someone who can fight and defeat Ganon. Ganon overheard this and threw the princess into the castle prison and sent his men after Impa. Impa fled for her life but was eventually tracked down by Ganon's men. Just as she was being surrounded by them, a young boy drove off the attackers. This boy was Link. Impa told Link what was happening and that he must save the princess. He accepted the quest and set out to reassemble the Triforce of Wisdom and free Zelda. Link must travel the massive world of Hyrule with only a small shield when the game begins. As he explores, he finds a sword from a mysterious old man in a cave. Now armed and protected, Link ventures out into the wild, encountering fairies, peasants, merchants, and other guys that will point him in the direction of his next objective. Along the way, he will battle enemies of many shapes and sizes, ranging from Octoroks to Gibdos. Link's objectives are simple. Get the pieces of Triforce, but the pieces are hidden inside dungeons all across Hyrule that are guarded by huge boss enemies. Each dungeon is a unique maze, and the only way Link can easily navigate each dungeon is by finding the dungeon map and compass. Also in each dungeon is a new item that Link can use. One such item is the boomerang, which works in 2 ways. It can stun enemies or gather items from a distance. Once he has explored the dungeon, he will have obtained all the keys and will fight the final boss. After defeating all 8 bosses and the dungeons, Link reassembles the Triforce, which enables him to sneak into Ganon's fortress on Death Mountain. He battles the Prince of Darkness and destroys him with a silver arrow. After gathering the Triforce of Power from the ashes of Ganon, he gives both the Triforce of Power and Wisdom back to Zelda after releasing her from her cell. Zelda then states that peace shall return to Hyrule. Legend of Zelda really defied categorization because it's many things. It's an action game, an adventure game, a puzzle game, an open world, and an RPG all rolled into one. One of the unique aspects of Legend of Zelda is the fact that there's no real set path. While you can tackle the dungeons in the order presented in the game, it is possible to conquer these dungeons in any order the player wishes. There are even instances where people have completed the majority of the game without even getting the sword at the beginning. Once you beat the game, you can replay it on harder difficulty, known as the second quest. The dungeons are different, as are the placement of items in the world. You can also access the second quest simply by creating a new game file titled Zelda. Shigeru Miyamoto, going back to his youth, formed Legend of Zelda into a coming-of-age tale where people could identify with Link. He's a silent protagonist and begins the game as a young, ordinary boy, but over time grows much stronger and eventually defeats the ultimate evil. Miyamoto actually created Legend of Zelda and Super Mario at the same time. He wanted Mario to be extremely linear, while Zelda would be the complete opposite. The initial game design had Link already having his sword, because the designer said people would be confused and have trouble finding their way. Shigeru Miyamoto ignored them because he wanted the gamers to communicate with each other and share their ideas and experiences solving the puzzles in the game. This was a brand new concept at the time, and Miyamoto said years later that Zelda became the inspiration for something very different, Animal Crossing. This was a game based solely on communication. The idea of communication led to The Fun Club, which was a bi-monthly newsletter offering hints and tips about complicated NES games, especially Zelda because of all the hidden rooms and areas. The mailing list exploded, and by 1988 there were over 1 million members in the Fun Club. With this massive fan base, Nintendo of America president Minoru Akara started the Nintendo Power magazine, which is still published today.
Six great issues plus 6 free strategy guides on a hot new game. That's twice the power for still $15. Wow, call now.
Legend of Zelda became a massive hit in America. It went on to sell millions of copies and was one of the top sellers in the NES's lifetime. In the very next year, Shigeru Miyamoto began work on Zelda 2 and was released in Japan in January of 1987. Ironically enough, it was released in Japan before Zelda 1 even came to America. Zelda 2 is very different than the original Legend of Zelda in many ways. First of all, Zelda 2 is the first and only Zelda game not to have Legend of Zelda in the title. But Zelda 2 had some elements in it that would become commonplace in the Legend of Zelda series and are seen in today's games.
Story-wise, Zelda 2 is a direct sequel to Legend of Zelda. Taking place a few years later, a now 16-year-old Link begins his next adventure. Noticing that a picture of the Triforce has suddenly appeared on the back of his hand, Link takes a visit to Impa. Impa takes Link to the North Castle, and by pressing his hand against the sealed door, opens a chamber where Link finds a sleeping princess. It is here that Impa informs him that this is the original Zelda, the Princess of Hyrule from a long time ago, and is the origin of the legend in Legend of Zelda. As the story goes, long ago, the Prince of Hyrule attempted to obtain the Triforce, but Zelda refused to tell him the location, so the prince contacted a magician to extract the information from her. Zelda remained steadfast, so the wizard placed a sleeping spell upon her, which also resulted in the wizard's death. The prince could not reverse the spell, so he had to place his sister in the castle, hoping that one day she will awaken. In an attempt to somehow come to terms with his terrible mistake, he announced that all females born in the royal family from that point on would be named Zelda in honor of his sister. Impa tells Link that this mark on his hand signals that he will be the one to awaken the sleeping princess. She then gives him 6 crystals and instructions that state the crystals need to be placed in specific palaces around Hyrule. Doing this will open the way to the Great Palace, which holds the Triforce of Courage. This has the power to awaken the princess. The followers of Ganon are hell-bent on revenge and seek to kill Link and use his blood on the ashes of their fallen master to reincarnate him. As stated before, Zelda 2 is much different than its predecessor. First thing you'll notice is the game is not solely a top-down adventure. It's primarily a side-scroller. The top-down perspective is used essentially as a giant overworld map. The game then switches to a side-scroller when any action takes place, such as entering a city or attacking enemies. The combat system is fairly simple. Link once again has a sword and a shield, but now he can stand up or crouch to use them. As a result, you will need to pay attention to certain enemies who will hit you in low or high areas. Later on, Link can jump, which will give him additional moves such as the down or upward thrust. Magic is a new addition to the series. You can learn a new spell from an old man in every new city that you visit. Link usually has to complete some sort of a side quest before the old man will teach him, such as collecting items in the world. Some spells are required to advance in the world, such as the jump spell, which allows Link to grab ledges which otherwise he could not get to. There's also an experience system in play. Link gains experience points, which he can use to upgrade his attack power, life, and magic a maximum of 8 times. He gains XP by killing enemies. Link can find heart containers in the world as well as magic containers, which will permanently increase his life and magic points. By the end of the game, Link has placed the crystals in their rightful places, and he enters the Great Palace. As he goes deeper, he encounters the final boss of the game, a shadow version of yourself called Dark Link. After defeating the Bizarro you claim the Triforce and return to Zelda, waking her. Many new elements in Zelda 2 are still with the franchise today, such as the inclusion of NPCs and the Triforce of Courage. Magic will also become an integral part of the Zelda series, and has been pretty much in use in every title since. Dark Link also returns in the Ocarina of Time, and a Shadow Link appears in Four Swords. Also, many of the names of towns in the Adventure of Link will be used again for the sages in Ocarina of Time, such as Ruto, Serra, and Naburo.
Zelda 2, while quite different from its predecessor, still went on to become a massive success. It would be 4 years later before we got another iteration into the great series of Legend of Zelda. Except this time, instead of being 8-bit, we were going 16.
Hundreds of years before A Link to the Past begins, the world called the Sacred Realm currently lives in an age of peace and prosperity. The Triforce, rumored to have the ability to grant a single wish to anyone who touches it, has remained undisturbed and is a symbol of this land. But a thief by the name of Ganon sneaks in and obtains the Triforce. Using his wish, he turns the Golden Land into a wasteland called the Dark World. In an attempt to seal away Ganon, 7 wise men of Hyrule band together and use their powers against him. To protect the wise men from Ganon's army, the Hylian Knights come and provide cover. Eventually, these wise men succeed, and Ganon was sealed away forever. Unfortunately, the Hylian Knights were nearly wiped out, and only a few of them survived. A legend states that Ganon would return, and only a descendant of the Knights would have the strength to defeat him. Jump to the present-day world, a sorcerer named Ganon has overthrown the King of Hyrule and orders his men to capture the 7 maidens who are descendants of the 7 wise men. They wish to banish these maidens to the Dark World, which would break Ganon's seal. Princess Zelda is one of these maidens and is imprisoned by Ganon. Meanwhile, Link, a descendant of the Hylian Knights, is telepathically contacted by Zelda, begs him to rescue her. Link battles his way into the castle and rescues Zelda. As the two are escaping, they run into the royal sage who tells Link the legend of the Master Sword. Only this magical sword can defeat Ganon. Link then travels to Kakariko Village and finds the elders of Hyrule. He tells Link that in order to prove himself worthy of the sword, he must first retrieve the 3 pendants of virtue, the pendant of courage, wisdom, and power, which are located in 3 dungeons in Hyrule. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past returned to the top-down perspective and got rid of the side-scrolling aspects of Adventure of Link. Because of the additional power of the SNES, Link is now more maneuverable. He can run with certain items and he can travel in a diagonal direction. His sword also moves in a cutting motion as opposed to the stabbing in previous games. Link to the Past also gives us many new characters and plot devices that would be used numerous times in the future, such as the hookshot and the Master Sword. Heart pieces were also introduced here. Instead of gaining an entire heart container, you now had to combine 4 pieces of heart. The dungeons were much more complex, incorporating multiple levels. Link to the Past also gave us the idea of 2 worlds, the Light World or Hyrule, and the Sacred Realm. Because of the success of Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, Nintendo had a lot of resources so that A Link to the Past had plenty of time dedicated to it. As a result, A Link to the Past actually had 1 megabyte of memory in its cartridge. Normal SNES games only had 512 kilobytes. And this gave the development team a huge world to create. The music in A Link to the Past really solidified many themes that are currently in the Zelda universe. Zelda's Lullaby was introduced, as well as the Royal Family theme, Kakariko Village, Ganondorf's themes, and others. These would all become standard and would be seen in all future Zelda games.